Why did the morning air feel heavier than usual? The sun had only begun to rise above Fort Bragg, spilling muted streaks of gold and gray across the sky. Dew clung to the grass, sparkling faintly in the light, but the chill carried something sharper than cold, an edge of anticipation, almost metallic, as if the field itself knew a test was waiting. Boots struck against cracked asphalt in measured rhythm. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes was jogging toward formation. Her breath came evenly at first, then hitched, tightening where scar tissue pulled faintly across her shoulder. That shoulder, that constant reminder. She adjusted her pace, keeping her movements disciplined, controlled. She had fought through pain far worse overseas in Kandahar, where every step might carry her closer to a firefight. Yet here, on American soil, her battlefield had shifted. The war was not against insurgents or shadows in alleys, but against perception, against judgment, against the quiet smirks of officers who never bled beside her in the dirt. Ahead of her, Colonel Reynolds stood like an iron post. His uniform looked freshly pressed, the creases sharp enough to cut. A clipboard rested in his hands, but the real weapon was his gaze, sweeping over the field with the precision of a man who tolerated no weakness. Stories followed him. He was known for enforcing standards with ruthless consistency, but also for sarcasm that stung deeper than any reprimand. He didn't raise his voice often. He didn't have to. His words landed like strikes. Sarah slowed her jog, bracing as she neared him. Her shoulder ached with that stubborn throb, but her voice stayed steady when she spoke. "Sir." He cut her off without looking at her. His tone was clipped, cold, echoing over the dew-soaked field. "Don't start with excuses before the warm-up. We don't tolerate that in this unit." The words pierced sharper than the chill air. He hadn't even given her the courtesy of eye contact. To him, she wasn't a decorated combat veteran. She wasn't someone who had pulled men to safety under gunfire. She was just another soldier trying to explain away performance. Sarah swallowed, her jaw tightened. She wanted to argue, to explain that the ache in her shoulder wasn't laziness but shrapnel, scar tissue, survival. But what would it matter? The colonel didn't want the truth. He wanted to see if she would endure. "Yes, sir," she said simply. Discipline in tone, calm in delivery. Fury pressed against her ribs, but she caged it in silence. The rest of the unit gathered, boots snapping to attention, mist curling at their legs like ghostly remnants of mornings past. Sarah scanned the faces, veterans with lines etched deep from years of service, fresh recruits wide-eyed with nerves, and peers who stole quick glances at her. Some looked curious, some skeptical. They'd heard fragments of her story, Kandahar, firefights, the injury, but rumors were just shadows of truth. None of them knew what it had cost her to stand here today, upright, still in uniform. "Stretch, 10 counts, no slacking, we move as one unit." Colonel Reynolds' voice rolled out over them. Bodies moved in sync, arms extending, muscles straining, heads tilting. Sarah followed, every stretch deliberate, mindful of her shoulder. The burn flared, but she breathed into it, mastering control. Each motion reminded her of the battlefield, where discipline wasn't a drill but survival. A whistle pierced the morning. Lieutenant Hayes, front and center. The air shifted. Heads turned. A ripple of curiosity, even pity, ran through the ranks. Sarah's pulse quickened as she jogged forward, boots striking damp earth, until she stood rigidly before the colonel. His eyes locked onto her, sharp, calculating, like a hawk sighting prey. "I hear you've been struggling with PT lately," he said. A smirk tugged at his mouth. "Would you care to explain why a decorated combat veteran can't handle a few push-ups? Or are you expecting the rest of us to carry you?" The words sliced through the air. The soldiers murmured, low ripples of sound. Some smirked with him, others frowned at the cruelty. Sarah felt the sting deep, not only of mockery but of exposure. She opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. What was the point? No description of burning nerves and fractured bone would matter. He wasn't seeking truth. He was pressing, testing, probing. She inhaled slow, "Understood, sir," she replied evenly. Not a crack in her voice, not a tremor in her stance. The colonel studied her longer, as though searching her silence for weakness. Finally, he turned his gaze back to the formation. "All right, everyone. Today's PT will be no less than your last. Push yourselves. If Lieutenant Hayes can manage her duties while injured, then the rest of you can certainly keep pace." A strange half-acknowledgement, wrapped in sarcasm. Sarah returned to her place. The air seemed heavier now, eyes on her. Some pairs filled with respect, others with doubt. None of them knew the truth. They hadn't seen her pinned under enemy fire, shoulder torn by shrapnel, dragging a wounded comrade to cover while the night sky lit with mortar flashes. They didn't know the quiet ache that never left her, a reminder not of weakness but of survival. The whistle blew. The PT began. Push-ups, sit-ups, sprints, obstacle courses. The field became a crucible testing not only the body but the will. Sarah moved with precision, every rep measured, every breath controlled. Pain radiated from her shoulder, yet she bent it into obedience. Each push-up was a silent declaration. "I am more than your judgment." Minutes stretched into an hour. The sun climbed, burning away the mist. Sweat soaked her uniform, muscles screamed, but Sarah did not falter. Around her, younger soldiers collapsed, gasping. Some cursed under breath. Others pushed harder, chasing her pace. "Lieutenant Hayes, look alive," the colonel barked. She dipped lower, pushed higher. Her rhythm defied his smirk, a controlled rebellion against assumptions. Her mind wandered not away but back, to Afghanistan, to alleyways choked with dust, to nights when gunfire shredded silence, to mornings when the question wasn't how many push-ups she could manage, but whether she'd see another sunrise at all. That battlefield had carved her, shaped her, scarred her, and yet here she stood, judged by surface strength, by numbers on a clipboard. The sprint circuit came next. She led the pack, her pace steady, deliberate. She didn't need to win. She needed to endure. Preservation and defiance lived side by side in her stride. When the whistle finally blew for dismissal, Sarah stood upright. Her shoulder throbbed, her lungs ached, but she was intact. No applause, no recognition, just silence broken only by the shuffle of boots as soldiers filed past. Some nodded subtly. Others avoided her eyes. The colonel had already moved on, clipboard tucked beneath his arm as though none of this mattered. But it mattered. Because this wasn't about PT. It was about dignity, about resilience, about surviving mockery with silence stronger than words. Sarah zipped her jacket against the lingering chill. The scar beneath it pressed faintly against the fabric, hidden but burning. She thought of Kandahar, of the wall she'd been thrown against, of the blood that had soaked into her uniform that night. That scar wasn't weakness. It was proof. Proof she didn't owe anyone. Not yet. As the field emptied, Colonel Reynolds' voice cut through the air again. "Lieutenant Hayes." Soldiers froze mid-step. Eyes flicked back to her. She straightened, boots snapping together, gaze forward. The colonel's stare bore into her. His tone dripped with sarcasm. "You claim an injury is holding you back. Yet here you stand, apparently unscathed. Enlighten us. What's preventing you from completing standard PT exercises without complaint? Or is this some new excuse to avoid proving your mettle?" A ripple of murmurs moved through the ranks. Sarah's chest burned, not from exhaustion but from frustration. He wasn't testing her body anymore. He was testing her integrity. Her shoulder pulsed. The scar beneath her jacket ached. The words clawed at her throat, begging to be spoken, the truth of firefights, of mortar blasts, of carrying men while wounded. But she swallowed them. She clenched her fists, then released them. Silence was a weapon, too. "Yes, sir," she said, voice level. A declaration, not submission. The colonel's smirk widened. Satisfied, he barked, "Next set, push-ups, sit-ups, sprint circuit again. No whining, no shortcuts." The soldiers scattered to positions. Sarah lowered herself to the ground. Pain flared, but her rhythm was steady. Each repetition was no longer about muscle. It was defiance in motion, quiet rebellion, a message to everyone watching: strength isn't loud, it doesn't need to explain, it just endures. By the end of the second circuit, sweat blurred her vision, but her stance was unbroken. The colonel stopped in front of her, clipboard tucked under his arm. His eyes narrowed. "Not bad, Lieutenant," he said. The smirk lingered, but his tone carried something else now: curiosity. "But I still don't see the excuse. You look capable of more. So what is it? Hiding behind a fabricated injury, or truly limited?" Her hands trembled faintly at her sides, not from fatigue but anger, controlled and locked tight. She wanted to shout, to strip away the fabric and show him the jagged truth, but timing was everything. She inhaled, deliberate, her gaze steady. "Sir," she said, calm but unyielding, "I am fully committed to my duties and my team. I will continue to perform within my limits to ensure I don't compromise the mission or anyone's safety. That is my responsibility, and I take it seriously." A flicker passed through his expression, unreadable, but sharper than before. Measured silence hung between them. Then softly, so only she heard: "Measured words, Lieutenant, but words don't earn medals. Actions do. Prove me wrong." Sarah didn't blink, didn't flinch. "Yes, sir." The colonel moved on. The soldiers around her remained still for a heartbeat, sensing the tension, the unspoken battle. They didn't know the half of it, but they saw enough. Sarah drew in a slow breath, chest heaving. She had endured not just PT, not just Mockery, she had endured him, and herself. And she wasn't done. Why did the empty field feel louder than when it was full of soldiers? The morning formation had broken. The shouts had faded. Boots no longer struck in rhythm. What remained was silence, thick and unyielding, pierced only by Sarah Hayes' own breathing. She leaned against the chain-link fence at the edge of the training ground, her shoulders sagging, her muscles burning. Sweat soaked her uniform, dampening the fabric until it clung to her skin. But the ache in her body wasn't the real weight she carried. It was the echo of the colonel's voice, sharp, mocking, relentless, still cutting through her mind. Every word had been a test, every smirk a challenge. She had stood firm, endured, refused to break. Yet now, alone in the aftermath, frustration clawed at her. Her hand rose, almost unconsciously, brushing the fabric of her jacket where the scar lay hidden beneath. The flesh throbbed faintly, a phantom ache of battles long past. She closed her eyes. And Kandahar came rushing back. Night, always night. The city wasn't quiet, it never was. The streets groaned under tension, whispers of movement, distant echoes of gunfire. The acrid stench of smoke and dust filled her lungs. Somewhere beyond the crumbling buildings, mortars cracked the darkness, each blast closer than the last. Her team had been moving through an alley when it happened. A flash, a deafening roar. The world turned white, then red, then black. She felt her body slam against a wall, the shock ripping through her shoulder, hot metal biting into flesh. Pain shot through her chest. She couldn't hear for a moment, the world muffled like cotton pressed against her ears. But then the sounds returned, shouting, screaming, a soldier down. She remembered dragging him, her hands slick with blood, his, maybe hers, pulling him toward cover while another teammate laid down fire. Every inch felt like a mile. Every breath threatened to give out. She thought she might collapse right there, pinned in the alley between death and duty. But she didn't. She had kept moving. That scar had been born there, in a night where survival was a miracle. And now here she was, mocked in a training field, judged by push-ups and sprints. Sarah opened her eyes, the memory dissolving into the present. The field stretched empty before her, patches of grass flattened by boots, the air still holding faint echoes of exertion. She drew a long breath, steadying herself. The absurdity of it all nearly broke her. How could anyone compare the chaos of combat to a set of drills? How could endurance on a battlefield mean so little in front of a clipboard? But she didn't let the bitterness consume her. She straightened, exhaled, and forced the emotion into steel. This wasn't the battlefield she wanted, but it was the battlefield she had. She left the fence and moved on with her day, slipping back into the rhythm of duty. Reports to file, equipment to check, schedules to oversee. Each task she performed with precision, her movements clipped, disciplined. To anyone watching, she looked composed, but beneath the surface, thoughts churned. Would the colonel ever see? Would anyone? Or did scars only matter when someone demanded proof? At lunch, she sat alone. Fork in hand, she barely touched her food, her eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the cafeteria walls. Conversations swirled around her, laughter from one table, complaints from another, the familiar buzz of soldiers trying to carve out moments of normalcy in their day. But Sarah's mind was elsewhere. Back in Kandahar, she remembered another night, the firefight where she'd been pinned down. Gunfire ricocheted off stone, sparks bursting against walls. The sky glowed orange with flames from a burning vehicle. Her heartbeat had matched the rattle of the rifle in her hands, steady, deliberate, refusing panic. She remembered the weight of another soldier against her side, bleeding, slipping in and out of consciousness. Her choices then weren't about sprint times or push-up counts. They were about whether he lived to see another dawn. She pulled him back. She always pulled them back. But here at Fort Bragg, her history was invisible. The next morning came quickly. Dawn light stretched across the field again, golden and cold. Sarah arrived early, as she always did, warming her muscles with a careful jog. The ache in her shoulder whispered but didn't scream. She learned how to manage it, stretch, breathe, adjust. She wouldn't let it define her. But she knew Reynolds was waiting. Sure enough, the colonel stood at the head of the field, posture rigid, clipboard in hand. His eyes scanned the formation with hawk-like focus, and when they landed on her, there was no smirk this time, just sharp expectation. Lieutenant Hayes, front and center. The words cracked like a whip. She stepped forward, every motion controlled. Around her, soldiers shifted slightly, their eyes flicking toward her, some curious, some quietly respectful, others waiting for her to falter. Reynolds' voice carried easily across the field. Yesterday you struggled to meet the standard. Today I expect full compliance. No hesitation, no excuses. We're here to build strength, endurance, resilience. Can you manage that, Lieutenant? Or are we going to have to reconsider your priorities? There it was again, sarcasm layered over authority. Sarah held his gaze. Yes, sir, she said evenly. Her calm wasn't for him. It was for herself, for the soldiers watching, for the unspoken truth she carried. The warm-up began. Sarah stretched deliberately, every motion precise. The ache in her shoulder flared, but she embraced it, turned it into focus. Pain was not weakness. Pain was memory. Reynolds' voice cut across the field. Faster, Lieutenant. Don't hold back. Effort is measured by intensity, not excuses. She didn't flinch, didn't rise to the bait. Push-ups followed. She lowered, pressed, lowered, pressed. Each repetition steady, deliberate. Her body screamed, but she caged the pain, turned it into rhythm. Lower, Hayes, push higher, keep your core tight, Reynolds barked. She complied, silent rebellion in every controlled movement. The sprint circuit came next. Boots dug into the earth. The whistle blew. Soldiers exploded forward. Sarah's stride was measured, conserving energy, balancing endurance against the threat of her shoulder giving out. Her breaths were sharp but steady, controlled. Her mind drifted again. Kandahar. Another ambush. Bullets cracking against walls, explosions shaking the ground. She remembered how her body had moved instinctively then, faster than thought, every decision weighed against survival. She had carried her team through those streets, heart pounding, lungs burning, but never faltering. And here she reminded herself the principle was the same. Endure, persist, outlast. When the sprint ended, lungs heaved, sweat dripped, and soldiers staggered. Sarah straightened, breathing controlled, eyes forward. Reynolds approached her, his voice low but sharp enough for those nearby to hear. You've maintained pace, but I still don't see the effort reflected in performance. There's a gap between appearance and reality, Lieutenant. Can you account for it?" The weight of eyes fell on her, some skeptical, some quietly admiring, all waiting. Sarah inhaled steady. She could answer. She could tell him everything, but words wouldn't matter. Timing would matter. She looked at him, her face calm, unreadable, and she said nothing. Silence again, her sharpest weapon. The colonel narrowed his eyes. Around them, soldiers shifted, sensing something unspoken, something restrained. The session pressed on pull-ups, bear crawls, agility drills. Each movement wrung sweat from their bodies, drew gasps from their lungs. Sarah endured, controlled, adapted. Pain laced every repetition, but she held the line. Every soldier who looked her way saw the same thing, unflinching composure. Reynolds watched too. His corrections barked sharper when directed at her. His gaze lingered longer. His presence pressed harder. And yet each time she endured. By mid-morning, the PT session peaked in intensity. The unit gasped and stumbled, but Sarah remained measured. Her muscles burned, her shoulder throbbed, but her face betrayed nothing. She had lived through worse. She had survived nights where every breath was a gamble. This was nothing. And yet she knew the real test hadn't come. Not yet. Why were so many eyes on her now? Sarah felt it before she saw it, the subtle weight of glances, quick but lingering, from the soldiers around her. During formation, during drills, even in the cafeteria line. They weren't starring outright, not yet, but they were noticing. They had seen how she held steady when Reynolds mocked her, how she endured without protest, how she performed despite obvious strain. Curiosity had taken root. Respect, too, in some. But curiosity could be dangerous. The colonel saw it as well. That morning the mist still clung to the field, pale ribbons curling around boots as the unit assembled. Colonel Reynolds stood as always, posture ramrod straight, clipboard in hand. But his gaze lingered on Sarah longer than usual. She noticed it. Everyone did. And then his voice cracked through the stillness. "Lieutenant Hayes, front and center." The familiar command, the familiar weight. Sarah stepped forward, measured, composed. She could feel the subtle shift in the formation behind her. Soldiers held themselves a little straighter, their eyes locked forward but their minds focused on her. What would she do today? Would she falter? Would she endure? Reynolds' smirk was gone. His expression was sharper now, intent. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice carrying across the field, "you've shown discipline under pressure. I'll grant you that. But discipline is not enough. This unit requires strength, endurance, and absolute commitment. Do you believe you can meet those requirements?" "Yes, sir," she replied evenly. Her voice carried no tremor, no hesitation. Reynolds stepped closer. He lowered his tone, but the soldiers still heard the edge. "Then prove it. No holding back. No measured packing. Show us all what you're capable of." The order wasn't about exercise. It was about pushing her to the brink. The warm-up began, longer, sharper, faster. Sarah moved with deliberate control, but Reynolds' corrections came quickly, harshly. "Faster, Lieutenant, you call that effort. Lower on those push-ups, don't cheat yourself. Hayes, don't let the recruits outpace you." Each command was a blade, designed not just to test her body but to slice at her pride. She complied, rep by rep, breath by breath. Her muscles screamed, her shoulder burned, but she kept her form precise. She didn't give him the satisfaction of faltering. Her silence was louder than any protest. The soldiers noticed. As they rotated through drills, sit-ups, sprints, pull-ups, the younger privates stole quick glances. They saw her jaw tighten, her breath steady, her eyes locked forward. They saw a woman who could have broken but didn't, and in their silence, admiration grew. Sarah felt it, the subtle shift in the air, the unspoken recognition. But Reynolds felt it too, and he didn't like it. By mid-morning, the PT session reached its breaking point. The colonel barked them into another sprint circuit, his voice hard. I want intensity. I want speed. I want to see who's worth the uniform you wear." The whistle blew, boots tore against the earth. Soldiers surged forward. Sarah paced herself, every stride a balance between endurance and pain. Her shoulder flared, her lungs burned, but she pressed on, not to win, to last. Halfway through, Reynolds' voice cut across the field. "Hayes, push harder. If you can't give me everything, maybe you don't belong here." The words struck deep, not because she believed them, but because the soldiers heard them. Her jaw tightened. Anger flared, hot and sharp. She could strip off her jacket right then, show him the jagged scar, silence his words forever. But no, not yet. Timing. Always timing. She finished the sprint steady, controlled. When they collapsed into line again, her breath came hard but even. Sweat dripped down her temple. She kept her gaze forward, posture straight. Reynolds paced the line, his boots crunching against the earth. He stopped in front of Sarah, his eyes locked on hers. "Not bad, Lieutenant," he said, voice deceptively calm. "But still not enough. Do you want to know what I see?" She didn't answer. "I see someone hiding," he continued. "Hiding behind words, behind discipline, behind silence. You've got your soldiers fooled, Hayes, but not me. I see through the act." The murmurs in the formation were faint but real. Soldiers stiffened, shifting slightly. Sarah's hands clenched at her sides. Her breath caught in her chest. He was pushing her harder now, not with drills but with humiliation. She inhaled slowly, letting the anger burn without consuming her. And when she spoke, her voice was steady. "Sir, with respect, I am here to serve, to endure, and to lead. That is not an act." The colonel's eyes narrowed. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then he barked, "Formation, next set." The unit moved, but the air was charged. Through the rest of the drills, bear crawls, burpees, obstacle climbs, Sarah pushed herself to the edge. Her muscles trembled, her lungs burned, her shoulders screamed, but she did not falter. Every motion was deliberate, precise. Every breath was measured. Around her, soldiers noticed, more than before. The younger ones began matching her pace, mirroring her control. Even the veterans glanced her way with something like quiet respect. Reynolds noticed too. His corrections came less frequently now, his tone edged not with mockery but with scrutiny. By the time the session ended, the field was littered with exhausted bodies. Soldiers gasped, bent over, wiped sweat from their brows. Sarah stood upright. Her chest rose and fell, her muscles ached, but her posture was unbroken. The colonel studied her from across the field, his expression unreadable. When he finally dismissed them, soldiers filed past, some nodding subtly, others stealing quiet glances. Their respect wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. Sarah tightened her jacket against the morning chill. The scar beneath pressed faintly against the fabric, a secret waiting. She touched it briefly, her fingers lingering. Not yet, she reminded herself. The time wasn't right. Later, alone in the barracks, Sarah sat on the edge of her bunk. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint hum of distant drills outside. She rolled her shoulder, wincing as the ache spread. Her hand traced the scar beneath her shirt. She thought again of Kandahar, the night of the mortar blast, the blood, the screams, the soldier she'd pulled from the rubble. She could still feel the weight of him against her, his breath shallow, his blood soaking her sleeves. She had carried him. She had saved him. That scar was the price she paid. And here it was her shield. She exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the ceiling. She knew Reynolds would push again tomorrow. Harder, crueler. He wouldn't stop until he broke her, or until she revealed the truth. But she also knew something else. Every day the soldiers were watching. Every day their perception shifted. Every day her silence spoke louder than his words. And when the moment came, when she chose to reveal the scar, it wouldn't just be for herself. It would be for them. For the soldiers who needed to see that strength wasn't always loud. That leadership wasn't always shouted. that sometimes dignity didn't argue. It endured. Sarah lay back on her bunk, muscles throbbing, shoulder burning. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow would come, and with it another test. And she would be ready. Why was the colonel staring at her before the drills even began? The air was heavy with anticipation. The mist that usually softened the morning field had already burned away, leaving a sharp clarity in the air. Every sound seemed amplified, boots stamping into place, the metallic rattle of canteens, the faint cough of a soldier clearing his throat. And then, layered over all of it, the colonel's gaze. He stood at the front with his clipboard tucked beneath his arm, his jaw set, his eyes locked squarely on Sarah Hayes. No smirk, no sarcasm, just the steady focus of a man who had chosen his target. "Lieutenant Hayes," Reynolds barked, voice sharp. "Front." The word cracked like a whip. Soldiers straightened, heads turned subtly. Sarah's boots struck the earth as she stepped forward. Her face gave nothing away. Inside, her chest tightened, her pulse quickened. The burn in her shoulder was already there, faint but insistent, like a warning of what was coming. Reynolds let the silence stretch. Then he spoke, his voice deliberately carrying across the formation. "3 mornings now, Lieutenant, 3 mornings and still no clarity. You give me effort, yes. You give me silence, yes. But you give me no truth. Tell me, soldier, are you injured, or are you hiding?" A ripple moved through the formation. Soldiers stiffened, some shifting on their feet. The question wasn't just for her anymore. It was for all of them. Sarah met his eyes. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. "Sir, I am capable of completing my duties," she said evenly. Reynolds' expression hardened. "That's not what I asked. This unit runs on trust. If you can't be transparent with me, how can I trust you in the field? How can they?" His hand swept toward the formation. Eyes followed. Soldiers who had been neutral before now felt the weight of the moment. Curiosity sharpened into tension. Sarah's fists tightened at her sides. Inside, words clawed at her throat, begging to be spoken. She could end this now. Strip off the jacket, show them the scar, silence the colonel once and for all. But no. Not yet. She drew a breath, her voice calm. "Sir, my commitment to this unit is absolute. My silence is not deceit, it is discipline." The words carried low and steady. Soldiers shifted again, some subtle nods, some skeptical glances. Reynolds' eyes narrowed. "Discipline without transparency is arrogance," he snapped. "Very well, Lieutenant, today we'll settle this. You will lead every drill, every circuit, every exercise, and we'll see if silence holds up under strain." The formation straightened. Murmurs ran like a current. Sarah nodded once crisp, "Yes, sir." The whistle blew. "Push-ups first." The colonel barked the count, his voice slicing the air. Sarah lowered, pressed, lowered, pressed. The ache in her shoulder flared, sharp, relentless. She buried it beneath rhythm, every rep steady, precise. Soldiers on either side glanced at her, then matched her pace. The formation began to move as one, following her lead. Reynolds saw it. His tone grew sharper. "Lower, Hayes, don't cheat yourself, don't cheat them." She obeyed, pushing harder, burning deeper. Her breath came in steady bursts, her jaw clenched. "Next sit-ups," the colonel's voice never left her. "Faster, Lieutenant, show them you're not hiding." Her core screamed, her lungs heaved, but she held the line. Soldiers watched, some wide-eyed, some grim-faced. They saw her endure. The sprint circuit came next. The whistle cut through the air. Soldiers surged forward, but Sarah exploded into motion first. Her boots pounded against the earth, her stride sharp, deliberate. The burn in her shoulder spread, searing into her chest. She forced it down. Halfway through, her vision blurred. Sweat stung her eyes. The memory of Kandahar crashed into her mind, running through alleys, bullets chasing her steps, a wounded soldier slung against her shoulder, every stride a war against collapse. The weight had been unbearable, but she had borne it. She bore it still. By the time she crossed the line, her lungs were fire, her muscles shook, but she didn't collapse. She stood upright, shoulders back, gaze forward. The colonel's jaw tightened. "Not bad," he said. His voice carried, calm but cutting. "But tell me, Lieutenant, is this strength, or just stubbornness, which serves a unit better, Hayes? A soldier who hides her weakness, or one who admits it?" The silence that followed was heavy. Soldiers stood still, eyes locked on Sarah. Her chest rose and fell. Her shoulder burned beneath her jacket, the scar alive, aching, pressing. She could reveal it now. She could unzip the jacket, strip away the doubt, and end this game. But she didn't. Her voice was low, steady. "A soldier serves best by standing when it matters most. That is what I am doing, sir." For a flicker, Reynolds' expression shifted, something unreadable. Then his tone hardened again. "Then stand through the obstacle course. Lead them. Every wall, every crawl, every climb. Let's see if silence survives when your body breaks." The soldiers moved as commanded. Sarah led the way. Walls loomed. She vaulted them, her body protesting but obeying. Dirt stretched beneath barbed wire. She crawled through, mud clinging to her uniform, pain slicing through her shoulder with every pull. She gritted her teeth, refused to falter. The rope climb came next. Her palms burned, her muscles trembled, but she climbed steadily, reaching the top, pausing only to breathe before descending. All the while soldiers followed, watching, matching, enduring because she endured. By the end they were drenched in sweat, gasping, trembling. Sarah's chest heaved, her body quaked, but she stood straight. The colonel stepped forward, his eyes locked on hers. "You didn't break," he said, voice low, almost grudging. Then louder so the unit heard. "But you still haven't answered the question. Injury or excuse, truth or deception. Which is it, Lieutenant?" The silence was unbearable. Soldiers' gazes bore into her. Respect, curiosity, doubt, all tangled. Sarah's hand twitched at her jacket zipper. The scar beneath throbbed, demanding release. Her breath hitched. Not yet, she told herself, not yet. Her voice came calm, steady. "Sir, I have given you my strength. I have given you my endurance. When the time comes, I will give you my truth." A murmur rippled through the ranks. Soldiers shifted, glanced at each other, sensing the gravity of her words. Reynolds' eyes narrowed. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. He stepped back. "Dismissed," he barked. The formation broke. Soldiers filed away, whispering quietly, stealing glances at Sarah. She stood alone for a moment, chest rising and falling, her hand lingering on her jacket. The scar pulsed beneath, alive, waiting. She knew the moment was coming. The question was when. Why were the whispers following her into the barracks? Sarah Hayes sat on the edge of her bunk, boots unlaced, sweat still drying on her uniform. The day's drills had wrung her body to the edge, every muscle trembled, her lungs burned, and her shoulder pulsed with that familiar ache. But it wasn't exhaustion that unsettled her. It was the way silence broke when she entered a room, the hushed voices, the quick glances. They weren't mocking, not anymore. They were wondering. She pulled her boots off, setting them neatly beneath the bunk, when a voice broke the quiet. "Ma'am." She looked up. Private Daniels stood awkwardly near her bunk, clutching his canteen in both hands. Young, barely out of training, his posture was stiff with hesitation. His eyes, though, carried something else, not mockery, not doubt. Respect. "Yes, Private." Sarah's tone was even. Daniels shifted his weight, glanced around, then leaned in slightly. Permission to speak freely. She studied him for a beat, then nodded. "Go ahead." He lowered his voice. "What's he trying to prove? The colonel, with you, we all see it. He rides you harder than anyone. And you don't crack, not once, but—" He hesitated. "Why?" The word hung between them, simple, heavy. Sarah exhaled slowly. She could lie, deflect, keep the silence she had clung to all week. But Daniel's eyes weren't hungry for gossip. They were searching for something steadier, something human. Her hand drifted to her shoulder, fingers brushing the edge of her jacket. For a moment she thought of unzipping it, showing him, ending the question right there. But no, not yet, not here. Instead, she said softly, because sometimes silence says more than words, "You'll understand one day." Daniels nodded slowly, not fully satisfied but respectful enough to let it go. Another soldier, Corporal Myers, had been listening from his bunk across the aisle. He leaned forward, his tone careful but curious. "Ma'am, with respect, most people would have broken by now. Whatever you're carrying, it's heavy, and yet you're still standing. That means something to the rest of us." Sarah met his gaze. His words weren't flattery, they were quiet truth, and she felt the weight of them. The barracks grew quieter. Soldiers lay in bunks, some feigning sleep, others listening. Sarah could feel their attention, the unspoken unity forming in the silence. They were watching her not because Reynolds mocked her, but because she refused to yield. She gave a small nod. "Then stand with me, that's all I ask." The words were simple, but they settled like iron in the room. That night, as the barracks dimmed and soldiers drifted toward sleep, Sarah lay awake. Her eyes traced the shadows across the ceiling, her hand resting lightly on the scar beneath her shirt. The urge to reveal it pressed harder now, as if the scar itself longed for daylight. But timing mattered. She thought again of Kandahar, the night the mortar struck, the soldier she had dragged through fire and chaos, the blood, the screams, the weight on her shoulders that felt like the whole world. That scar was proof of survival, proof of sacrifice. But proof demanded the right moment, and Reynolds was forcing it closer. The next morning the field was alive with energy before the whistle even blew. Soldiers lined up sharper, their postures straighter. Something had shifted in the air, not just routine, not just drills. Expectation. Reynolds sensed it. He stood taller, his gaze sweeping the formation with calculated precision. He could feel the whispers too, the way the soldiers' eyes strayed toward Sarah when they thought no one noticed. It irritated him. No, it infuriated him. He stepped forward, his boots cutting into the dirt. His voice cracked like thunder. "Enough of this." The words snapped through the morning air. Soldiers stiffened. Silence fell. Reynolds' gaze locked on Sarah. Lieutenant Hayes stepped forward. She did, steady, composed. "You've endured," Reynolds said, his voice carrying across the field. "I'll grant you that, but endurance without truth is useless. A soldier who hides weakness is a liability, and I will not tolerate liabilities in my unit." A ripple moved through the formation. Soldiers shifted. Reynolds' tone sharpened. "So tomorrow things change. Tomorrow you will not just complete the drills. You will demonstrate leadership. You will lead the entire unit through the most grueling course we have, and you will not pace yourself. You will not hide behind silence. You will give everything or you will be finished here." The words landed like gunfire, final, absolute. Sarah's chest tightened. She felt the soldier's eyes on her, heavy, waiting. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. "Yes, sir," she said. Her voice carried calm, but inside her pulse thundered. Reynolds studied her, his expression sharp, then turned on his heel. "Dismissed." The formation broke, but no one moved quickly. Soldiers lingered, glancing at Sarah, whispers rippling quietly, some with doubt, others with fierce respect. Sarah stood still, her jaw clenched, her hand brushing the scar beneath her jacket. The moment was coming. Tomorrow would strip everything bare. She wasn't sure if Reynolds knew what truth he was about to unleash. But she did. And she was ready. Why did the air feel heavier than it had all week? The dawn broke sharp and merciless. No mist, no softness. Just a sky carved clean, pale blue, the sun already pressing down like judgment. Soldiers stood in formation, boots aligned, backs straight, the field stretched out before them like an arena. Today wasn't routine. Everyone knew it. Colonel Reynolds paced the line, his boots grinding against gravel, his eyes sharp as blades. He carried no clipboard this morning, just presence, command. Lieutenant Hayes, his voice snapped across the field, front. Sarah stepped forward, her pulse thudded steady, measured. Her shoulder throbbed faintly under her jacket, a reminder of what she carried. She felt the soldier's eyes on her, not mocking, not dismissive, watching, waiting. Reynolds stopped in front of her, close enough that his shadow cut across her boots. Today you lead them. Every drill, every circuit, every obstacle. If you falter, you fail. If you hide, you're done. Understood? Sarah held his gaze. Yes, sir. The whistle blew. Push-ups first. Sarah dropped, palms biting into dirt, lowering, pressing, lowering, pressing. The ache in her shoulder flared sharp, radiating through her chest. She buried it beneath rhythm, each rep steady, her breath even. Soldiers around her matched her pace, some grimacing, some gasping, but none wanting to fall behind. Reynolds barked from above. Lower, Hayes, show them discipline, show them truth. She pressed deeper, arms trembling, sweat beading on her forehead. Her jaw clenched, but her form didn't break. Next came sit-ups. Her core burned, her lungs heaved, but she lifted, dropped, lifted again. Soldiers mirrored her, groaning under the strain, but her pace held steady. Then the sprint circuit. The whistle shrieked, boots tore against the earth. Sarah surged forward, her stride sharp, deliberate. The burn in her shoulder screamed with every pump of her arm, the old wound flaring alive. She forced it down, lungs burning, vision blurring. Halfway through, the world slipped, the field dissolved. And she was back in Kandahar. Night, mortar fire split the darkness. Buildings crumbled in plumes of dust. Bullets whined past her ears. Her body slammed into a wall, shrapnel searing her shoulder, blood hot and slick. She remembered dragging Private Lawson through rubble, her own body breaking but her grip unyielding. His blood soaked her sleeves, his breath shallow. She had moved because stopping meant death for him, for her, for all of them. She blinked and the field snapped back. The sprint wasn't rubble. The soldiers weren't screaming. But her body remembered. The pain, the weight, the urgency. She crossed the line, chest heaving, sweat dripping. She didn't falter. Reynolds' eyes tracked her. Not enough, he snapped. You want their respect, push harder, lead stronger. The obstacle course loomed. Walls, ropes, crawls beneath barbed wire. Sarah led. She vaulted the first wall, her body straining, shoulders screaming. Dirt scraped her palms. Sweat stung her eyes. She climbed ropes, muscles trembling, every pull a battle. She crawled through mud, her jacket dragging, the scar beneath alive with fire. Soldiers followed. Some stumbled, some cursed, but they matched her pace, fueled by her resolve. She wasn't just leading drills anymore. She was pulling them through, the way she had pulled Lawson through Kandahar's rubble. Reynolds stalked the sidelines, his voice sharp. Faster, Hayes, don't let them carry you, you carry them. She pushed harder, vault, crawl, climb. Every motion carved agony into her body, but she didn't break. By the end, soldiers collapsed in mud and sweat, gasping. Sarah stood, chest rising and falling, her body quaking but upright. The colonel stepped forward, his gaze locked on her. You lead with silence, he said, his voice calm but cutting. You think discipline alone earns trust. No, soldiers follow truth, so where is yours? The words cut deeper than the drills. Around her, soldiers lifted their heads, eyes fixed on her. They were waiting, not for Reynolds' judgment, for her answer. Her hand twitched at her jacket zipper. The scar pulsed beneath, burning, demanding. She could end it now, show them, strip away doubt, silence Reynolds forever. But the moment wasn't hers yet, not quite. Her breath came steady, slow. Sir, she said, voice calm, carrying, truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it stands, sometimes it endures. Reynolds' jaw tightened. Poetry doesn't save units, proof does. The tension was unbearable. Soldiers' gazes bore into her. Whispers rippled faintly. Reynolds leaned closer, his voice low but sharp enough to carry. Tomorrow, Hayes, you want to lead. You want to be trusted. You bring proof. or you're done." Silence fell heavy. Soldiers froze, eyes darting between colonel and lieutenant. Sarah's chest rose and fell. Her hand lingered on her jacket, the scar beneath searing like fire. Tomorrow. The moment was coming. And when it came, the truth would not just silence Reynolds. It would speak for every soldier who had ever endured in silence, every scar carried unseen. Why did the morning feel like a trial before an unseen court? The unit assembled in perfect rows, the air tense, expectant. No one laughed. No one whispered. Even the young privates, usually restless with nervous energy, stood rigid. The field stretched wide beneath the pale sky, the rising sun burning sharp along the horizon. Colonel Reynolds stood at the front, posture severe, his presence colder than usual. His voice cut through the silence. "Today we settle it." The words dropped like stone into water, rippling through the ranks. His gaze locked on Sarah Hayes. "Lieutenant, you lead, every drill, every circuit, no restraint, no silence. If you falter, you fail. If you hide, you're finished. Today we see the truth." Sarah's chest tightened. The scar beneath her jacket pulsed, alive, waiting. She steadied her breath, her posture straight. "Yes, sir." The whistle shrieked. Push-ups first. Dirt pressed into her palms as she lowered, pressed, lowered again. Her shoulder burned sharper than ever, pain flaring with each motion. Sweat slicked her brow. She kept her rhythm even, every rep precise. Soldiers around her matched her, groaning, gasping, but none willing to break before she did. Reynolds paced close, voice sharp. "Lower, Hayes, show them, prove it." She obeyed, pressing deeper, the pain slicing through her chest. Next, sit-ups. Her core screamed, her breath ragged, but she lifted, dropped, lifted again. Around her, soldiers mirrored her pace, their eyes darting toward her, their faces straining but resolute. Then came the sprints. The whistle cut through the air. Boots pounded the earth. Sarah surged forward, every stride agony, her shoulder blazing with fire. The world blurred. Her lungs clawed for air. But she pushed on, remembering nights in Kandahar when running meant survival, when stopping meant death. She crossed the line, chest heaving, sweat soaking her jacket. She didn't collapse, she stood. Reynolds' voice snapped. "Not enough again." The whistle blew. Soldiers groaned, staggered back into motion. Sarah pushed forward, her body shaking, her vision tunneling. Pain screamed through her shoulder, but she refused to falter. Again they crossed the line. Again Reynolds barked. "Not enough again." The soldiers' faces twisted with exhaustion, their bodies trembling. But when Sarah surged forward once more, they followed. Whispers had spread in barracks, in mess halls, in quiet corners. They all knew she carried something unseen. They saw it now, in every labored stride, every clenched jaw, every silent refusal to break. Reynolds saw it too, and it enraged him. "Again," he roared. The field became an endless crucible. Sweat-soaked uniforms, mud clung to boots, lungs heaved like bellows. Sarah's body screamed for release, her shoulder searing with every motion. But she endured. Every stride was defiance. Every breath was rebellion. At last the colonel barked, "Formation." Soldiers staggered back into line, gasping, trembling, sweat dripping from their brows. Sarah stood at the front, chest rising and falling, her jacket clinging damp to her skin. Her vision swam, but her stance held steady. Reynolds stepped forward, his boots striking sharp against the earth. His eyes locked on hers, hard, unrelenting. "You don't speak," he said, his voice carrying across the field. "You don't explain, you don't admit, you hide, and that makes you a liability. So here, before all of them, answer me. Are you injured or are you hiding?" Silence fell heavy. Every soldier's gaze fixed on her. Not one looked away. Respect, doubt, curiosity, all tangled in their eyes. Sarah's hand twitched at her jacket zipper. The scar burned beneath, throbbing like it had waited years for this moment. Her throat tightened. Her breath came sharp. She could stay silent, endure, refuse, but she felt the weight of the unit pressing in, their need for truth, their hunger for something real. Her hand rose, fingers gripped the zipper. She hesitated. Reynolds' voice sliced the silence. "Answer them, Hayes, or admit you have nothing." The words landed like blows. Her jaw tightened, her chest heaved, and then slowly, deliberately, she pulled the zipper down. The sound cut sharp through the silence, the rasp of metal teeth sliding apart. She shrugged off the jacket. Gasps rippled through the formation. The scar stretched jagged across her shoulder, raw and unmistakable, the flesh puckered and twisted, the mark of shrapnel that had torn through her body and nearly ended her life. The fabric of her shirt clung around it, damp with sweat, but the scar burned brighter than anything else. Soldiers stared, stunned, some with wide eyes, some with jaws clenched, some with tears threatening. Sarah stood tall, shoulders squared, the scar bared for all to see. Her voice was low, steady, carrying across the field. "This is what I carry, this is what I endured, and this is why I will not break." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Reynolds' face was unreadable. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, but for once no words came. The unit stood frozen, their respect no longer whispered, no longer hidden. It was alive, blazing, unspoken but undeniable. Sarah zipped the jacket slowly, deliberately. Her hands trembled faintly, but her voice did not. "Sometimes dignity doesn't argue," she said softly. "It stands." The field remained silent, heavy with the weight of what had just been revealed. And in that silence, everything had changed. Why was the silence heavier than the shouting had ever been? The scar still burned across Sarah's shoulder, though the air against it had cooled. Her jacket hung loose at her sides, half-zipped, her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of exhaustion. But her posture was steady, her eyes forward. The scar was no longer hers alone. It belonged to every gaze that had seen it, every breath held in the stillness that followed. The soldiers stood frozen in formation, not rigid, not mechanical, but struck silent. Their eyes weren't skeptical now. They weren't curious. They were locked on her with something else, awe, respect, quiet understanding. For days they had seen her endure. They had felt the weight of her silence, the sharpness of her composure. Now they knew why. And knowing did not diminish her, it elevated her. A murmur finally broke the silence. Not laughter, not derision, just a low ripple of voices, hushed, reverent. Soldiers shifting, nodding subtly, their gazes lingering on her scar. Colonel Reynolds stood motionless. His jaw was tight, his eyes sharp, but not with triumph, not even with anger. Something else flickered there, fleeting but unmistakable recognition. Sarah zipped her jacket slowly, deliberately. The scar vanished beneath fabric, but its presence lingered, alive in every soldier who had seen it. She stepped back into formation, her posture unyielding, her silence deeper than words. Reynolds drew in a long breath. His voice, when it came, carried less edge than before. "PT dismissed." The soldiers broke formation, but not with their usual chatter. They moved slower, their eyes drawn back to Sarah again and again. Some nodded as they passed her. Others gave small, wordless salutes of respect. No one mocked. No one doubted. Sarah stood still, the weight of their respect pressing heavier than any insult had. Later in the barracks, the whispers were different. Not rumors, not questions. Stories. Soldiers telling each other what they had seen, voices low but filled with conviction. She carried that through drills. She never said a word. She didn't break. Private Daniels lingered by her bunk again. His voice was soft. "Ma'am, I think we all get it now." Sarah gave him a faint smile. "Then carry it with you, Daniels, not the scar, the silence." He nodded, his eyes steady with newfound determination. That evening, Sarah sat alone outside the barracks. The sky stretched wide, painted in streaks of orange and purple as the sun sank low. The field lay quiet, the earth scarred with footprints from the morning's trial. She traced her shoulder lightly through her jacket, the scar pulsing faintly, alive. Her thoughts drifted back: Kandahar, the mortar blast, the blood, the night she thought might be her last. That scar was carved in fire and pain, but it had carried her here to this moment. Footsteps crunched behind her. She didn't turn. She already knew who it was. Colonel Reynolds stopped a few feet away. His voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "Lieutenant." She didn't move. "Sir." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Reynolds exhaled slowly. "You could have spoken on day one," he said at last. "Could have explained, could have ended it." Sarah's gaze stayed on the horizon. "And if I had, would it have meant the same?" Reynolds didn't answer. His jaw shifted, his eyes narrowing slightly, but not in anger, in thought. Sarah finally turned to meet his gaze. Her voice was calm, steady. "Respect isn't demanded, it's earned, and sometimes it's endured." Something flickered in his eyes again. Not defeat, not apology, but recognition. Reynolds gave a small nod, barely perceptible. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the quiet. Sarah watched the horizon, the last light fading. The scar beneath her jacket throbbed gently, but not with pain, with memory, with dignity. She thought of the soldiers who had watched her, the whispers that had turned into respect, the silence that had spoken louder than any speech. Her chest rose and fell steady. Her heart was calm. Sometimes strength wasn't the loudest voice. Sometimes it wasn't the sharpest order or the fiercest battle cry. Sometimes strength was quiet. It was discipline. It was dignity. It was silence that endured until truth revealed itself. Sarah stood, the last of the light brushing against her face. She turned back toward the barracks, where voices buzzed low, steady, changed. Soldiers who had seen, soldiers who would remember. The scar was hidden again, but its truth no longer was. And as she walked, steady and upright, the morals settled over her like evening air, quiet, soft, undeniable. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.